Hey, Alter Everything listeners. We know that turning raw data into insights can be time-consuming and challenging, but we've got good news for you. Alteryx can transform your analytics. Alteryx drives positive business outcomes by enabling fast, data-driven decisions. And you can try out our products today. Start your 30-day free trial of Alteryx Desktop or the Analytics Cloud platform at alteryx.com/altereverything. Welcome to Alter Everything, a podcast about data science and analytics culture. I'm Megan Dibble, and today I'm talking with Ken Black about how he has analyzed large amounts of climate change data in Alteryx. We'll talk about the evolution of his project, what the data tells him about climate change patterns, and what has surprised him over the course of his analysis. Let's get started. Hi, Ken. It's great to have you on our podcast today. Welcome.
Thank you, Megan. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate you inviting me to the podcast. It's my second round. I think I was on episode number 2.
Episode number 2, the deep archive. Go listen, everybody. But yeah, it's great to have you back. For our newer listeners, could you introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, sure. My name's Ken Black. I work for GM Performance Motorsports out of Concord, North Carolina. I actually work from home. I have been working for GM for 9 years. Most recently in the last year with the Performance Motorsports division. But prior to working for GM, I spent 25 years doing environmental science. I'm a trained hydrogeologist I worked mostly on groundwater remediation projects around the country and specializing in numerical modeling, model development, and visualization. And then I spent 8 years doing process improvement work in a variety of industries before switching into automotive industry with GM.
Great. Super interesting background, and I'm excited to have you on today. I wanted to bring you on because of a huge project you've been working on around climate change data. I'd love if you could share a little bit about the history of your climate change data project, how you got started, and how this project in Alteryx has really evolved.
Sure. It was about a decade ago, I think in 2013, when I first started learning Alteryx. And coming right out of the gate, one of the things that I realized about learning Alteryx was that I learned it best if I had a project to work on, something that I could both be challenged by and learn a variety of tools in Alteryx. And so I started my mission or my journey with climate change by writing a 5-part article on how would you use Alteryx to gather climate data, interrogate it, process it, visualize it, to understand what was happening with climate change. So I thought in the beginning that what I was doing was just learning Alteryx. And I had no idea that what would transpire over the next decade, which was what I call my unintentional never-ending project. This is a project that I never intended to have happen. It just happened naturally. One thing led to another. And it was first spawned by a comment someone made to me that climate change is fake. And I thought, how could climate change be fake? This was a very powerful person that said this, very intelligent, very wise. So I thought I should make up my own mind as to whether or not climate change is real or fake. And to do that, I should do what I do best, which is go look at the data. And that began the journey. Now, the journey has continued for a decade just because of, like I said, one thing leads to another. And the more I learn, the more I want to learn. So that's what we're here to talk about today.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that you had a question and you said, let me investigate the data myself. And I think, as a data analyst and just also a curious person, even for big questions like this, to be able to dive into the data on your own and conduct almost your own scientific analysis is super powerful.
Really, in the beginning, when I first started looking at the data, it was in such a form that most normal people wouldn't be able to access the data. It was just so antiquated, and it was written and stored in such a way that they were trying to minimize storage back in the early days. And they hadn't realized that storage was cheap and writing accessible data was more important than saving storage space. So you had to do a lot of work to get the climate data out, sort of uncompacted from this very compact flat file storage methodology, this antiquated methodology that they used. So Alteryx really opened my eyes right in the beginning for being able to read that data, then being able to use it to make intelligent insights on what was happening. And I think that one experience really made me realize the value of Alteryx more than any other project. It was like, even to today, I try to use other programs to read that type of data, and you can't.
Hmm.
It's too difficult. So even back a decade ago, Alteryx was ahead of the game. And I think that's what taught me to adopt this mentality that I can pretty much answer any question I want with whatever type of data someone gives me if I'm using Alteryx. And so that's what I've done. And that's how I've expanded my horizons within Alteryx.
What has the data been telling you over the years? What are some findings that you've had?
Sure, let's go through the process by which I took this road.
Yeah.
So in my first rendition, I break this into phases, and each phase lasts about 2 years. And so in phase number one, I just wanted to see, could I read the data? Could I intelligently review it? Did it make sense? And so here's a kind of an untold story. When I was in graduate school, I rode my bicycle from Illinois to Texas, and the one summer.
Whoa.
So during that 800-mile ride, when I rode into Texas, the 2 days in a row, the heat index was 125 and 126. And as I rode down the road, the asphalt was melting behind my tires because of the weight of me and the bike. And I remember this because the normal heat was 105, 106 with heat index of 125, 126. And I went into a store and this girl looked at me and she said, "Don't you know it's hot out there? What are you doing?" Because I had a white t-shirt on. And she goes, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm riding my bike for 100 miles today." She's like, "Don't you know it's hot?" I'm like, "Of course I know it's hot." But I always remembered that because I was thinking, here I am riding my bike 100 miles day after day in this heat, and how hot can it get? So that was in
Hmm.
1986. So what I did was when I read this first block of data, I went back to the monitoring station
Oh, wow.
of those days because I had a logbook and I knew which days it was I rode into Texas. And I checked the data and it matched. I was like, it was 105, 106. It was exactly that at New Boston, Texas, and wherever else. It actually matched. And I was like,
Nice little quality assurance there.
yeah, I could believe in this data because it'd been, I don't know, 30 years since that happened. And I thought, if the data could be that accurate, then I'm onto something. And so that began my, I guess, obsession with understanding temperature, where I've been, the things I've experienced in my life. I knew instinctively that global warming was happening because I remember as a kid growing up in Chicago that the winters were bitterly cold. And when I would go back through the years to visit my family, the winters weren't as cold. And I thought, okay,
Hmm.
there's change in the air. This is what I like to say. There's change in the air. Now, what's causing it, I don't know. But
Hmm.
I knew from my experiences that things were happening. So after that, and after moving, I had to move a couple times to Texas and back to Georgia and Tennessee. And we had some record heat waves in maybe 2014, 15. I started doing more work and I went back and got another segment of data, another couple of years worth of data. And I started thinking about, where is global warming happening? Can you see it in the data? What can you tell by processing hundreds of years of data? And like I said, one thing led to another. And I started with big picture questions. And then I started narrowing down on specific topics. For example, melted roads in Alaska. Why are roads buckling and melting in Alaska? It's because permafrost is melting. So I wanted to understand that. So different topics would pop up through the years, and I would go get the data and I would check to see, does the data support what's actually happening in the physical world? Well, as years go by, I started giving these presentations at Alteryx Inspire Conference. I did one in 17 and 19 and 21. Each time I would go give those presentations, I would have a new part of the story to tell. And so what's happened is, in the beginning, I thought, there's no way to detect global warming, really. I mean, no, certainly no way to predict it. Maybe you could detect
Hmm.
it, but not predict it. So as years went by, I realized that I created this model, which I call my global warming simulator, and I started testing it. I started to say, okay, if this is real, if these patterns that I've found are real, then maybe I can make predictions. I didn't think it would work out. So I did, in my last phase work, I looked at predictions over 6 months, and they were way better than I thought. And so last week, or two, I've taken the last 2 years of data and compared them to my predictions.
Hmm.
And that's been very interesting to look at. And I haven't published any of it yet. But suffice it to say that in a lot of areas, the models are very accurate. But there's a couple of areas that I'm finding where heating is accelerating and cooling is happening more than expected. So I haven't written those results yet. I haven't shown those results, but it's been a very interesting experiment. Let's put it like that.
Definitely. When you talk about making predictions, what kinds of methods have you been using? What have you learned about pattern development or algorithms or modeling in Alteryx through this?
That's a really good question. I never intended to try to do temperature predictions, but what I was able to do was by doing basic data mining operations and thinking about weather in a different framework than we normally think of it. I've been able to establish these patterns of change that are happening over decades. Now, when I say, what is this different framework? It's pretty simple, actually. We experience weather on a day-to-day basis. Today is August 18th. It's such and such temperature. Tomorrow it's going to look a lot like today. The next day, and then eventually a month from now, it's going to get a little cooler. That's how we experience temperature. But there's a different framework where you could look at it. You could say, I'm here in Knoxville. Today's August 18th, 2023. What was it like a year ago on this day? And then 2 years ago, and 3 years ago, and a decade ago. So if you change the framework from day to day, temperature variation, and you say, I'm going to stay on a date at a location, and I'm going to look at the temperature change over time. Intuitively, you might think that that's just going to lead you to chaos, that there's going to be no consistency from year to year to year at a particular date at a location. And that's what I thought. But that wasn't right. There is a lot of consistency. For places that are undergoing global warming or temperature change, now this is based on maximum daily temperatures, for places that actually have things happening because of jet stream perturbations, because of other causes, you will find that you can generate models that predict that change. You could look at the statistical significance of those models. In areas where you have statistically significant models, you have a lot of change. It can either be heating or cooling. And that's what the premise of this work is looking at places all over the earth at every day of the year. So I have millions of models that I have to run to do this work. But it turns out that because of Alteryx's great computational speed and the flexibility of its tools, I can do a global warming simulation in 35 minutes.
Wow.
At over many thousands of stations. And so by doing that, I've been able to make these predictions, and then I've been able to let years go by and pull the data after it's been collected and compare it to my original predictions. So I've done that on using my own model, but I've also done it with AI/ML models, about 20 different AI/ML models, XGBoost and all kinds of gradient methods, various things I've tried, like 20 of them, and I've published those on my blog. So what I found out was that my method worked better than any of those. So I knew I was onto something, and I just continue to let it evolve, because you have to wait for real world data to be collected to be able to assess your model predictions. So that's what I've been doing.
I remember when we were talking earlier about this, you mentioned that, like you said, you could pick up the work a year or two later or months later, and just because of the way Alteryx works and the workflows are set up, it's pretty easy to just jump back in, run again, and check in on your predictions, check in on the patterns and how things are looking now. So this is just a really interesting use case, I think, for the software.
It is. I have literally written probably 50 or more workflows to do this work. The truth is, I've got it boiled down to about 8 or 9. And I would like to one day sit down and stitch them all together. So I have to just push one button and everything happens. But the truth is, when you download the data and you bring it in and you have to process it to begin, it takes more than a day to process the data, first of all. That's the big time consuming step. So I could do the whole simulation within a day and a half, can do everything, day and a half, including the data update. But we're talking about 130 gigabytes of data, at least, coming in to the system. So it's a lot of information. but I do it in every country around the world. And it's just truly amazing to think that you could say, in Germany on this day, this is what I predict the temperature to be 2 years from now, 3 years from now, and then to find out that, yeah, you were pretty close within a degree. I mean, it's amazing. The places that don't have such an agreement, the ones I've just identified, are in maybe a little bit more trouble because things are happening faster than expected over
Mm.
the last, say, 6 decades. So I'm very excited to go look at those and to try to find out what's triggering that. Why is that happening? And one of the places is in China. When I say one of the places, I mean the whole country. In
Mm.
composite, it's heating more than my model would suggest it should. And that's the first place I've ever seen that. So I'm going to be interested to find out what's causing it. And the truth is that it takes time and effort. Because really, what I've done is it's like a dissertation in a way.
Yeah.
It's equivalent to a PhD, honestly. The amount of the depths that I've gone and the verification work I've done, it's tremendous work. Decoding global warming, the article number 400 is a good one because it summarizes a lot of stuff in there. It talks about all the methods, the Alteryx methods I use, the workflows, the steps I go through. It talks about some of the findings to be a little more analytical than what we just covered. There's data in there, there's information. I show a lot of examples of how I went from kind of big picture, then zooming down into more detail. So there's a good story in that article. It's a good one.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to look at. And also, just as a side note for listeners, we're definitely going to link Ken's blogs in our show notes for this episode so that if you want to see more details on any of these things or on his work, you can always check those out in the show notes. How has this analysis and this project shifted your attitude towards climate change, especially with the extreme weather events we've had this year?
That's a really good question because I've been a student of the Earth my whole life, pretty much. And with
Hmm.
degrees in geology, I studied the Earth. Then degrees in hydrology, I studied water. And now I'm studying the atmosphere. And I don't claim to be a climatologist or meteorologist. I'm not. I don't have the training. All I have is data and the analysis of data. But what I learned in the other disciplines sort of applies in this work. There's a lot of nonlinearities. There's many complexities in atmospheric modeling. I'm not doing atmospheric modeling. I'm doing temperature predictions. They're very different. The reasons why temperatures change could be highly variable. Everything from how we're loading the atmosphere with greenhouse gases to volcanic eruptions, all kinds of things can affect our temperature distributions. But when we're living and we see something happen that we think is anomalous, like a deep freeze in Texas in February of 21 shut down their power supply, their electric grid. There's lots of problems. And then you get heat waves in Europe that's killing a lot of
Hmm.
people, and you get heat waves in the Northwest, and you get these things that we think are anomalous. We think, oh, why is this happening? This is just global warming. It turns out that a lot of these events are predictable and they're in the data. If we take the time to unpack the data and to analyze it and look at it, we could see that these events are repetitive events. It's just that we don't think of them that way. We don't think of why is tourism in Italy having to get shut down last month because it's so hot that people can't tolerate the heat and government just shuts down tourism. Well, I went to Italy in February and I was with a tour guide. And we were walking around in t-shirts. She says, we shouldn't be walking around in t-shirts. We should have coats on right now. But it's so different than when I was a kid that we walk around in t-shirts. Well, those are the patterns of change that I've detected, where it could be 20 degrees warmer now on that particular day than it was when that lady was a kid. So it's not surprising to me when we have these events that seem anomalous, but in reality, for me, I can look at the data and understand why. And I think that's sort of the most surprising thing of this. Doing this work has given me insights that I would not normally have. I wouldn't be able to say, I understand why Europe's getting heat waves or Scandinavia. But when you look at the data, you see why. You can see it. And these heat waves come up and they come up every year, same time, boom, 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 and they just get hammered. And then you can say Germany gets hammered in whatever month, and France gets hammered here or there. That's the thing about this is climatologists don't really recognize it because they're kind of down in the weeds of whatever they're studying. But if you look at the big picture of the data, then it gives you insights into what's going on. And I think that to me is one of the most valuable parts of this, Megan.
That's really interesting. And the fact that, I mean, you've had a really long journey on this long term project, but that it continues to surprise you in some ways, but then in other ways, you've been able to predict pretty accurately. So it's an interesting combination there.
The one thing I'll say, I mean, I don't want people to think that what I'm saying is I have perfect knowledge all over the world of what's going to happen. I don't.
Sure.
These patterns of change are geographically distributed. You could say that it might be the northeast part of the North America, or in the southern region or western region, or it could be Europe, or it could be in China or Australia. These things are spatially and temporally variable, and they don't happen everywhere. It's not like every day you get a pattern of change. It only happens in certain cases at certain times of the year. It's not like it's ubiquitous. And global warming is not ubiquitous heating. It's not like everywhere is getting hotter. It's not like that. There are places where it's getting
Hmm.
cooler. And why would it be getting cooler? Well, because the jet stream changes. Maybe jet stream is pulling cool air out of the Arctic down into the Midwest of the US in the middle of the summer. You wouldn't expect that to be the case, but it is, and it's happening every year. So as the big drivers of climate are destabilized or are changing over time, whether it be for man-made reasons or whatever, these patterns of change are what we're talking about, is what I'm talking about. And so I've made movies like, here's Russia. This is every day of the year in Russia. You can see when they get impacted by global warming. You can see when they get impacted by cooling. And it's not always obvious. It's just the way the data shows it. It's not like I'm a soothsayer my wife says, you're not a soothsayer for planet Earth. And I'm not, but all I've done is basic data mining and applying these analytic techniques to uncover these patterns of change. That's it. That's all I'm saying. And will those patterns of change? Of course they will. They'll change as we as humans continue to impact the environment. More likely than not, these degrees of heating might change. They may accelerate, they may decelerate, depends. So that I can't predict, but all I can say is that we can see what's happened over the last, say, 6 decades. We can see the change. It's very clear, and the signals are very clear in the data.
Yeah. So as we're nearing the end of our time, I'm curious if you have any resources or any places you would recommend for listeners to learn more or to deepen their education around climate change.
The funny thing is, Megan, every single day, if you just pay attention, if you just read CNN, you read other major news sites, you're going to see global warming type stories.
Hmm.
Part of my mission as I enter the sort of the next phase of work is I'm going to try to capture those stories and start writing about them. Just saying, okay, so this happened here. Let's take a look at it. Let's take a look at the temperature history. Let's see why this is happening. Is it consistent with the patterns of change or not? Is this just like an anomalous thing? The wildfires in Canada, are they creating an impact that is different
Hmm.
than global warming, for example? There's big things that are happening. Look what happened in Maui last week with the fires. We have too much dead wood in the forests, and forest fires get big and they get hot, hard to manage. So these things aren't necessarily global warming impacts. People might think automatically that they are. So I'm trying to figure out a way to teach people what is expected as part of the patterns of change. Of course, I could say people should come read my stuff. I have lots of Tableau dashboards out there that you could go on Tableau Public and use them to see is global warming happening in your area. If people want to read, they could read what I've done, what I've uncovered, and learn something from it. Step away from the politics of it. Go get the data from your local weather station and take a look at it and see what's happening in where you live. Start small and then build your knowledge base. I mean, I just went asking simple questions to suddenly having, worldwide data coverage. I had no idea that was coming, but that's why I feel more confident about it because I've looked at a lot of different places. But I would challenge people to take a look at it for yourself and make your own decisions and forget about what somebody else says. The story just continues. I continue to learn more.
Thanks, Ken, so much for coming on and sharing about your project and your work. I know I've learned some things today, and I will be linking resources in the episode notes.
Well, thank you, Megan. It was a pleasure to talk to you about this. Climate change is scary. It's a tough topic. Some people just don't even want to deal with it because it's so scary. But when you start realizing that we're getting to the point where human survival, it's getting so hot that cactuses are dying in Arizona and people can't survive. This is getting extreme.
It's very scary.
Yeah, it's very scary.
Yeah.
So what I could say is that if you're going to travel, you're going to think about going to Death Valley in the middle of the summer or some other times of the year, you might want to take a look at what's been going on in those areas, because you can pretty much tell what it's going to be. And I do that all the time when I travel. Pay attention to what's happening and make your own decisions. Do some data analytics. Find out what's going on for yourself.
Definitely. Thanks again, and I will talk to you next time.
Okay. Thank
Bye
you,
for now.
Megan. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss this.
Thanks for listening. To check out resources mentioned in this episode, head over to our show notes on community.alteryx.com/podcast. And if you liked today's episode, leave us a review. See you next time.